using the other name 4 years ago, remember, and basically putting back the European security order to pre-1997. This is the key element of Putin's aggressive policy against Ukraine. But you mentioned of Europe today, whether it's a soft power or are we talking about the values. I think there is a very vivid debate about all of it, but there is also a very much experienced, grown understanding that the European Union, which was forged, I would say, as an economic integration project, but through law, which is critical. The law is the main glue that puts us all together, and that entails values of how we see our society being regulated, is now so clearly strengthening its capabilities when it comes to defense that this is a different organization compared to what it was, let's say, 10, 15, 20 years ago with Solana security strategy. I think it was in 2003, you remember it well. We've gone, I don't know, not 7 miles, but 777 miles ahead. And
7,000 to go still.
Yes, but and one main point where the soft power of the EU is essential, that is the implementation of the most important value, which we haven't mentioned today, and this is about the values. This is the generally Christian, but also societal value of solidarity. Solidarity is everywhere, in every single European Union policy, in budget, in agriculture, in cohesion, in regional development, in external policies, in helping Ukraine. It's absolutely everywhere. In my experience, it is perhaps the most important value that brings us together. Otherwise, the whole concept would have been long ago dismantled. This is the strength that we have and that Ukraine shares. And a lot of respect to you, and congratulations to the MSC for having awarded Ukrainian people the award last night.
So I have 3 very final questions. Titi, and then there were 2 questions here at the back. I'll take them all together, and then we'll have a final round of replies.
Thank you, Natalie. Great panel, very vital. It's crucial that we discuss values. My name is Tytti Tuppurainen. I'm from Finland. And what Prime Minister said in his initial words, the values that he listed, they are actually values that are treaty-based in the European Union. It is European law. These values are not a matter of opinion, they are not optional, but it's European legislation. And we have instruments even to enforce them. Conditionality, Article 7 and so on. Now, yesterday we heard from Secretary Rubio that United States wants to embrace Europe with very different values. To me, it was a fatal embrace. They are values that Europe should, in my opinion, reject. So my question to this panel would be that, given that the transatlantic relationship is so important to current United States administration, as Rubio said, wouldn't it allow us to be a bit more assertive when defending our own values? Should we adopt a more values-based, more assertive values-based approach vis-à-vis United States? Thank you.
Great, thank you. And final question, actually only have time for one. Gentleman there at the end, yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, apologies.
My name is Nubar Fain, I'm from the United States, and this topic hasn't come up, but I heard about enlightenment and I heard about truth-based argumentation. I want to raise the topic as part of the values Europe can protect, the notion of science and the scientific method leading to science-based policies, which in my country are being completely undermined for the first time in my last 2 generations at least. So I'd like to ask, what can Europe do in the scientific establishment to fight back against the notion that opinion should be put up against fact, and going back to where authority or superstition can cause the populace to not know what to do with their health or their food or their climate issues, etc. So there just seems to be a total dearth of discussion on the scientific method and defending it, which should really have no borders. We're busy talking about defense, but we're not talking about the underlying engine of progress.
Great, thank you. And a very quick round of replies. Francisca, let me start with you.
Yeah, I very much agree. By the way, I'm very happy we have a lot of American scientists coming to my hometown, for example, Heidelberg, and helping us to work on Alzheimer on many things, because you have a health minister who believes in no science. And it will strengthen Europe, if I may say so. It's a pity for the US. But, you know, in order to, and I want to combine the two answers, we have to be more assertive. I said first, let's be more independent digitally, work on our own actors, and then implement our rules in the digital sphere. It's the number one to protect truth and scientific order. Second, we have to be more defendant on the military side. We have been speaking about this all weekend. And third, I think we need to be more independent on fossil gas and oil and gas, also from the US. I don't want to wake up one morning and Trump saying to me, if you don't stop the digital laws, you will get only your LNG gas and 20% plus, or you will get half of the gas only. I don't want to be in that situation. So we have to work on our independence there too. And last point, I think we can only do this as Europeans if the strong access between France and Germany and Poland. And I've been worrying the last couple of weeks that I don't see that access working well. And there will be no future of Europe against France, against Poland, only with them together. And I think that's our job in Germany to work on this.
Thank you. Pretty.
So very briefly, let me just touch on the main point about values and assertiveness. I actually believe in sovereign states, and all of us are capable when it comes to whether it's a scientific base, a technology base, a defense base, for absolutely standing on our own 2 feet, but not in isolation, by working together in cooperation. And, you know, if I come back to Secretary Rubio's speech, he's also telling us to do more. And there is something about not always looking to Uncle Sam to sort of be the backstop. Now, I agree with that to a certain extent. But what we must do is ensure that we're not dependent. This is the crucial thing. And collectively, and on this stage and in this room at this conference, between us, we're capable of doing so much more. We really are. And actually being leaders, pioneers, innovators, you know, being at the front of the queue on so many things. And I think that's really where we need to concentrate our energies and not get sucked into this sort of like doom loop of regressive talk against each other's countries and nations.
Jens.
I've spent 10 years trying to keep North America and Europe together as Secretary General of NATO, and that's not always an easy task. And then on this issue of assertiveness, when we disagree with the United States, I think that it is important to act and speak in a way that try to keep this family together and also work with friends all over the world. But I think at the same time, as friends and as allies, we have to be very clear when some core values are threatened or challenged. And for instance, on Greenland, many European countries, Norway, said very clearly it is unacceptable to claim the territory of another country. And we said that to our strongest ally. And I think that was the right thing to do. So sometimes we have to be very clear, especially when these core values are challenged. And therefore, but it's not only about clarity and saying what we think, but it's also about finding a way to address the problem. And the good news now is that we are in a better place now than we just were a few weeks ago, because now there is actually an ongoing process between Greenland, Denmark, and the United States to address the issues that has been raised, and hopefully we'll find a way to sort it out and continue to be together in this big transatlantic family.
Great, thank you. Andre, final word.
Difficult to add Avenue Fourth, something to what very smartly colleagues concluded, but just on the relationship with the United States. I think that after Davos and having analyzed the first day and then the second day and here the atmosphere, I think we are in a far better direction than we were before, which is a good point. And I think there is a lot of pragmatism and a good sense of solidarity among the EU member states on the core issues, just as Jens has said. And it's very clear in all our debates at the European Council, basically the solidarity is to the maximum. And I think we need to be assertive. I agree with this point about our values and our interests, to formulate them in a way which is, I would say, one of the best features of Europe, and that is in a respectful manner. Respectful manner. I think that the methodology, how we operate now in the changing world, is very important how this generation shall be seen in the future. Assertive, but respectful, protecting what we stand for. And I think that gradually things will evolve in the direction that democracies prefer.
Well, I think this has been a wonderful conversation, and I really do think that this values discussion is at the core of really many of the things that we're talking about. And my big takeaway from this discussion is that values are central, but they're really part and parcel of respect and solidarity and cooperation and unity and independence. And it's only if we actually work on all of these things together that we can actually ensure that our values prevail. Thank you very much to all of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated at the main conference hall. We'll get to the final session of this year's Munich Security Conference in just a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated at the main conference hall. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in the main conference hall for the final panel of this year's Munich Security Conference. Ladies and gentlemen, please join us in the main conference hall now. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats in the main conference hall now. Ladies and gentlemen, I kindly ask you to take your seats in the main conference hall now. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage the Vice Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of the Munich Security Conference, Benedikt Frake.
Hello everyone. Welcome to the very last session of this conference. Well done to you. You are the committed bunch. We love you in particular for sticking it out, and we'll keep your names on the invitee list, which, you know, I think is probably worth it. This is a long cherished tradition, particularly by my team, to wait until I haven't slept for 3 full days to put me on stage. So please bear with me. But I think that today's topic and my panelists will keep not just me, but all of us awake. Could I please ask on stage for wonderful women, could I have Yasamin Ansari? Fasiya Hassan, Björn Yang, and Hannah Leopard. It seems like Hannah has brought a fan club along. Young leaders. Perfect. So what we're going to do in this session in the next 43 minutes and 36 seconds is to talk about the future of the world order. That should be easy enough. You've probably all read the brief, I guess. Let me just remind you of the guiding questions that we're going to use. What are the next generation's visions and ideas for the construction of a new world order? How can these be put into practice? What is the effect of perpetual crises on the next generation's trust in institutions? And what mechanisms are needed to ensure long-term thinking beyond electoral cycles? And how do current policy decisions, for instance on climate transitions, public debt, and social welfare, affect intergenerational justice? How can it be ensured that those that will be most affected by these decisions have a say in them? These four young ladies make me really look like the old white men on this panel. But this morning was all dedicated to Europe and what Europe can do to counter the wrecking ball policies and politics that we see across the world. Now we're moving far beyond Europe, not only in regional scope, but on a meta level. We're turning to the next generation. And Yasamin, let me start with you. You are the youngest currently serving female member of the House. We love having you. And just give us a little idea, how did you get excited about politics at a very young age? And how can we get better at making sure that young people keep faith in democracy's ability to run things and rebuild this order? Should be on.
Everyone, oh, hello. Thank you so much for the question. Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I actually first got interested in politics when I was in high school. And I grew up in Arizona, and I currently represent Phoenix, Arizona in the US House of Representatives. And I was 16 years old when Barack Obama was running for president against...
That makes me feel really old now, thank you.
Against our former senator, John McCain. And he obviously had a once-in-a-generation ability to inspire. But during that time period is when I just jumped in. I started volunteering with our local Democratic Party, getting hyper involved as a 16-year-old, making calls, knocking on doors, getting volunteers to come out. And so got that first glimpse into politics then, but I did not decide to run for office until many years later after Donald Trump was first elected as president in 2016, and I was having an existential crisis of sorts, and decided, and I was working on climate policy on the UN Secretary General's climate team at the time. And when he pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, I decided to move back home to Arizona and run for the Phoenix City Council, where I felt I could make more of a local impact. So that's my story, but I think about this issue a lot, about young people. And I think young people in the United States already care deeply about foreign policy, but it's a matter of how foreign policy affects their lives on a day-to-day. Foreign policy looks like the impacts of the climate crisis. It looks like student debt. It looks like artificial intelligence taking jobs away and risking the future of work. It looks like endless wars and, their siblings or their parents or potentially them, having been impacted by those wars. And what we've seen in the United States over both political parties over the course of the last, several decades is not enough has been done to provide transformational change for young people. And so currently in the United States, first of all, the idea of buying a house is all but impossible. I'm almost 34 years old, and most people my age don't own homes.
I'm also almost 35 years old.
And housing is just entirely too expensive. Childcare is impossible. You know, people are going to school but having a harder and harder time finding jobs. They're impacted by the climate crisis and artificial intelligence, and then they are questioning their leadership, and somebody like a Donald Trump in this moment was able to really capitalize on those hardships, capitalize on income inequality, and offer something different. And I think that now what we've seen from that has been the most corrupt and authoritarian administration in United States history. We have seen, you know, more young people. There was a worry that young people were moving towards the right in the United States, and recent, you know, polling and data shows that is not the case. And they have quickly, even the gains that Donald Trump and Republicans made have quickly gone in the other direction, because they have seen that this is an administration that is only focused on enriching the president and enriching their family. But it's about where we go from here. And I think for me and for my party, of course, the Democratic Party, I think we need to offer bold, big changes for the future, not incremental change, but transformational change. We need to have policies that will make housing more affordable, that will make childcare more affordable, that'll really re-engage us on climate policy worldwide. And I think it's, you know, it's not just about rejoining the Paris Climate Accords anymore, but doing, you know, 10 times more as the United States on climate policy, on creating partnerships on climate security, on regulating companies in the United States. I know there's been some talk about it this weekend, but one of our largest domestic challenges and why it's so difficult to make progress on policy in the United States is the role of big money in our political system. And right now you have the artificial intelligence companies with the biggest super PAC prepared for the 2026 election, so that anybody who dares to talk about AI regulation is immediately facing millions of dollars against them in a campaign. And that is driving a lot of the I would say, skepticism of young people as well in the political system. So a lot of changes have to be made, but I am optimistic. I have so many, you know, I see young people every day in my role. I have a young team. And this election cycle, I'm seeing more and more young people who have never even thought about politics come forward, want to volunteer, want to get involved, and I think they are going to make a massive difference in this election, but we can't think of them as just a demographic in an election. Policies need to be designed to deliver for young people in a big way like they never have before.
You remember how I said out there that I'm not going to ask follow-up questions after the first question? I was lying. Let me just very briefly pick up on one point that you've just said, and I hear it over and over again. We need to fix sort of concrete problems immediately. Talk me through the sequence of, you know, fixing things like housing and the world order. You know, is it let's fix things at home first, and then later on when people are excited about the power of politics to deliver, we can then take care of the world order?
I don't think so. And you know, one thing that I will say, this might be the only thing that I would admit that I have learned from Donald Trump, is this lack of hesitancy to do a lot of things at once and not even think about the consequences. And that is manifested in terrible ways. But where I'm trying to get to is that I think my party has had an issue where we just want to do everything perfectly with all of the data and all of the backing and all of the buy-in and all of the you know, the debates for years on the nuances. And we don't need to do that. Like, when I picture the next administration and a Democratic president, I think we need to immediately enact a wealth tax and make sure that we are able to pay for universal health care for everybody in the United States of America. We're able to create new programs to make home ownership a reality. We're able to create free childcare programs. And we can do all of that while at the same time recreating the new version of USAID and re-engaging diplomatically on the world stage by rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement and the World Health Organization and all of the many, entities internationally that we've disengaged from, and create those in a way that's bigger and bolder and, more rooted in the realities and challenges of the year 2027 or 8 or 29 than ever before. And we can do all of those things at the same time, and we don't need to be so fearful. I also think a lot about, one of our biggest challenges right now is around ICE, our domestic immigration enforcement mechanism, or historically what that has been. And we are seeing masked agents on American streets terrorizing people of all backgrounds, racially profiling people. As I'm sure everyone has seen, 2 US citizens were murdered in broad daylight by these federal agents. And that is, to me, that's foreign policy. If our domestic situation is one that people are fearful to travel to the United States, that immigrants from all over the world are trapped inside our detention centers, where I have been several times, and the conditions are horrific, an absolute stain on the United States that I think will last for decades. That is an example of an agency that needs to be abolished immediately the next time there's a Democratic president. And we need to rethink what immigration enforcement looks like in the United States. It's going to take a lot of work to regain our credibility around the world, and I think that's justified. But I think that the next president has a real opportunity to show that government can work for people and that we can both deliver for people in the United States and be a credible partner around the world.
Thank you. Yes, come on. Let me turn to Fazia. Fazia is a member of parliament in the National Assembly of South Africa, and much more importantly, a member of our Women Parliamentarians program from last year. Thanks for being here this year. I think last year didn't work out for some reason in the last second. We love having you with us. And you've just made some good experiences at the sidelines of the G20 summit in, getting young people excited about global governance, getting young people engaged. Tell us more about that.
So as everybody would know, we hosted the G20 summit this year, or rather last year, and it was such an important G20. It was the first one that was held on the African continent, but it was also about, I think, cementing the role of the Global South in a really international community. And one of the things that we really pushed for was ensuring that youth representation and youth voices were centered. So apart from having what we call Y20, which is Youth 20, really an amalgamation of civil society, of different activists, etc., even young people just on the ground being able to make their views heard. One of the things we insisted on was also a youth parliament as part of the Parliament 20. And one of those things that actually came out of it is the notion that for so long, we as young people have had basically our lives set out for us by decision makers who don't understand our lived experience. And unfortunately also don't quite realize that the decisions they're making, we will live with the consequences of it. And you mentioned it, right? Around the climate crisis, around this global insecurity, around all these different issues. And young people are so far removed from the decision-making table in that regard. So there's been a huge push to really include young people. But the reality of the matter is that we need to move beyond tokenism. And there are many young people in the room today. It's incredible to see, not only on the panel, but in the audience as well. And I think we're starting to see that shift. But the reality also is that until we have a meaningful place at the table with actual decision-making power, it's just still going to be tokenism. And 10, 15, 30 years from now, when we are on the other side of the table, we're going to, I think, lament that we didn't actually make space for young people. And that's something that I don't want any of us to look forward. And I want to end on this. You know, we're seeing this sort of change in this global world order, and this is why I think the G20 was so important. We're pushing for a world that is no longer unipolar. In fact, I think that's changed. We're looking at a multipolar world. You're seeing different elements of power growing around the world. You're seeing BRICS. You're seeing, I think, rises in the global south. And until we catch up to that, we're going to look at a future and even a present in which even the Munich Security Conference would be a little bit surprised to see, well, all these new players are coming through. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that regard, because these conversations are happening here, but there's an entirely different conversation in the global south that's not being heard.
Thank you. Jan Young, you're a member of parliament from the UK's House of Commons, and again, not surprisingly, much more importantly, a member of our Women Parliamentarians program, this year's cohort. Welcome to the stage. You're a specialist on the economic aspects. Talk us through what economic challenges do to young people, what fear for jobs in terms of the AI revolution, stagnant wages, what does that do to people's fears and hopes and their readiness to engage in politics constructively and their readiness to be also pulled to the dark side?
Thank you very much, Benedict, for having me. And I know that your hope was that having young people on the closing panel would give everyone a lift and some hopefulness for the rest of the day. But I'm going to make everyone feel really bad just for one moment. And that's because young people are more and more dispossessed, feel more and more dispossessed by the economic systems that they are living in. And to use an analogy from development economics, the ladder has been pulled and kicked away by those older generations who have wealth and therefore have a lot of power in the democracies around the world. To give an example of this, about 3.5 decades ago when I was born, around the richest half of the UK population, so the richest 50%, owned just under 60% of UK assets. And nowadays, it's the richest 10% that own that proportion of UK assets. So wealth inequality has really accelerated, particularly in the lifetimes of millennials and Gen Z, particularly since the financial crisis as a result of the economic management of those crises and what came after. Now, we can spend all day arguing about whether the monetary and fiscal policies of Western nations was the right one for that time, but I'm just pointing out one of the consequences of the consensus that was in place at the time in the 2010s. And as a result of this, I would argue, distrust in democracy tracks more and more with age. So across the world, according to the World Values Survey, younger people are more likely to feel that democracy is not a good system of governance. That's true in the UK, that's true in China, which is where I was a correspondent for the Financial Times before I became a journalist. That's true in the US, where 1/6 of young people think that military rule is a good or very good thing. And these things, I think, should really, really worry us all, and they really worry me as somebody who was born in a country without the right to democratic participation, who came to the UK as an immigrant with my parents when I was very little, and now as a result of a wonderful British education and the public's trust in me, speak on behalf of not just myself, but my constituents in Early and Woodley and Reading. But I do feel that what unites young people in China, who I reported on previously, and also the young people in my constituencies, they feel that the Western democratic capitalist settlement has failed them. And that leads them to look for more and more extreme solutions and leads them to be more interested in strongman rule and authoritarian traits. And I think that's something we should all be very concerned about.
Thank you. Yes. Last but not least, Hannah, who is a journalist from Belarus and thus is not a member of our Women Parliamentarians program. You see how I was told to advertise this repeatedly. I hope you've gotten the message. She's a member of our Munich Young Leaders program. Many of you are in the room. And she's been on top of our most wanted speakers list for a little while. Unfortunately, she's also on top of the most wanted list of the Belarusian KGB. She's been sentenced to 10 years of prison in absentia. We're thrilled that you're here with us, well and free. Hannah, how do you influence politics from afar? How do you do that if you can't return home and use the traditional challenge of members of parliaments that you see here? How have you done that? How are you going to do it? And what is your advice to the far too many out there that have similar challenges?
Thank you so much. It's interesting how we shared the biography that the regime is writing for me, right? This wanted list, the KGB terrorist list. So, but obviously I'm a journalist and analyst from Belarus in exile. Can I share a secret first? And you are nodding, but that's actually going to be a secret about you, Benedict. So when we first met, you said that please be positive on a panel. And I will be positive, not because the CEO of the Munich Security Conference asked me to do so, but because
But very nicely. I asked very nicely.
Oh, of course. But because I am positive, and I'll stick to P words. So my first point that I would like to raise here is how we make the balance between, or how we solve the dilemma between power and influence. You are asking about me being in exile and how to influence the situation. So obviously many of you here live in your own countries, you are part of your own governments, and you sit at the decision-making tables, and you can influence the situation in your countries. But we are in exile. Does it mean that we don't have influence? I don't think so. Let me bring the example of Belarus here, and who could imagine that Belarus would be the hopeful example? But let me try to do so. As you know, Belarus is sandwiched between NATO, EU, and Russia, and the dictator of Belarus allowed Russian troops to attack Ukraine from the territory of my country. But what do we see when we look at people, at our society? The absolute majority of Belarusians is against any attempts to involve us in this invasion. They don't want Russian nukes to be stationed on the territory of Belarus. Why is this happening despite all the propaganda, despite all this influence, right, and power that the regime has? Partly because of the information, because of the incredible work of independent media. For decades, we've been feeding the independent information to Belarusians. We have also built the ecosystem of civil society in exile, so no NGO, no organization that was forced to leave the country became Polish, Lithuanian, Georgian. They are still working to reach out to people inside Belarus, and people listen to us. And we see the results of that. The regime was not able to send Belarusian troops to Ukraine. So that's one of the outcomes. And my advice here would be, Benedict, since you asked, is to move investment upstream to support not just states, but societies. And international institutions should also protect societies and not just states, because we keep talking about governments, dictators, and we don't focus on people. So that's the first P. My second P would be pressure. We discussed today pressure versus accountability during my program. And I believe that in order to also increase trust among young people, not only young people,
Thank you.
Of course. It's important to be clear and transparent and not to appease dictators, because a short story, when I was 14, I was accepted to this high school in Belarus, and it was shut down by the regime. So I was searched when I was 15, 16, you know, before I turned even 18, I was detained. And it also taught me that dictators cannot be appeased and they cannot be reformed. And I really hope that we will believe in that, because if we need long-lasting peace in Ukraine, we should impose as much pressure as we can on Russia. And my question is obviously if we're able to do so, and I hope we are. And my last P would be about principles versus pragmatism. So 2 P's here. When I talk, you know, journalist, civil society, young woman, she talks about principles. She's like so naive. I don't think this is naive. I think this is actually pragmatic. I think that principles help us deliver and help us ensure that you know, the choices that we make, they're also consistent, long-lasting. And if you don't believe me, ask Poland or Czechia in the previous century, or ask Ukraine, Belarus, Moldova, Georgia in this century, right, or Armenia. So we should have principles, because they are pragmatic and they help us to deliver and have consistency and peace. Another P, by the way.
Perfect. Yet another P. Thank you, Anna. We have 10 minutes left for questions from the audience. I see First one back here.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Dr. Inga Blum from International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War. It's a great honor for me to ask you as young people about actually the greatest threat that there is for human survival at the moment. Scientists have set the doomsday clock to the highest stage ever to midnight, which is 85 seconds to midnight. There are still 1,800 nuclear weapons between the United States and Russia on hair trigger alert, meaning that men like Putin or Trump could end all our lives just in an afternoon. Even a limited nuclear war in Europe would kill more than 100 million people in an instance, and in the 2 years after there would be over 2 billion people dying from the nuclear famine because the soot would rise and it would block out the sunlight and crops would just decrease. So this is a very urgent threat, and at the same time the international arms control regime is falling apart with the New START treaty just having ended. And I'm really worried that we are having those discussions about possible Eurobombs, which would further undermine the existing arms control treaty. That could well be the end of the non-proliferation treaty that Mr. Ischinger has mentioned on the first day. So my question to you is really, how can we come to risk reduction? And then what do you think about the proposition of the nuclear ban treaty? That is a treaty that has been negotiated in the United Nations by the non-nuclear weapon states. That is over 70% of the people in the world now who say that, well, we want to start, if nuclear weapon states don't disarm, then we want to unite and say that we don't want to live with this risk anymore, and we feel safer without any kind of nuclear umbrella. Yeah, so that would be my question.
Thank you. Very good, but slightly long question. Let's turn to you. Who wants to take this one from the panel? Yes, please, Yasmin.
I'll just touch on it and say I completely agree with you. Since my days back in college, I went to Stanford and studied international security studies, and several of my professors were folks who were leaders during the Cold War era, and hearing the description of how close we were to nuclear war then, and to think now, to your point, that we have rogue, dictator, authoritarian, like leaders in the United States and Russia and other parts of the world, and recent statements by our government about resuming testing, which has caused significant outrage in the United States and has actually caused a lot of Republicans, which is rare, to go and meet with the president and talk about this issue. So I share your concern. I've always been a supporter of nuclear zero, I believe it's called, to work towards a world sans nuclear weapons, and I think that is incumbent on the next generation to really keep pushing towards, because we did not live in that era, and so perhaps it's not, it's more of a hypothetical, but I think it's really important for everyone. So any pressure, I think, that can be exerted on the United States on this issue as well to tone down the rhetoric about, nuclear testing is vital.
Perfect. Do you want to take this one as well?
I just wanted to add something interesting that maybe hasn't been in the discussion before. So the South African former apartheid regime was actually a nuclear power. And it was a very interesting thing at the turn of democracy, in which we had to make decisions to unravel effectively the nuclear program. And we're also the only only country on the African continent with the capabilities. And so I think there are lessons to be drawn from that, because there was a lot of pushback from the old guard who did not feel like it should happen. But there was also a lot of young and new thinking and innovation saying there might be benefits in terms of nuclear power, in terms of isotopes, etc. But the reality is we need to ensure that we don't have any nuclear capabilities. And I think from there, what I want to talk about is just around negotiations, the need for compromise, but also constitutionalism. And it seems like a mundane thing to talk about, but it's about basic human rights. And when we're looking at these discussions, we never ever look again to Global South examples of where we actually have successfully removed nuclear capabilities in other countries. And I thought I should just put that into the conversation as well. Thank you.
Shall we take a few more questions, or do you want to answer that one? Okay. Wow, now we're getting there. Let's go over here, please. You didn't only just stick around for the last session, you're also pretty engaged. Well done. It should be on.
Should be on. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Jackie Munro. I'm the Opposition Minister for Science and Technology and the Environment in Australia, in the subnational government of, or Parliament of New South Wales. I'm curious about your engagement with non-traditional media, the way that you use social media and other communications means. You're all people who are links between less represented parts of society in government and in parliaments, and I think it's really critical that we understand exactly how we're speaking to new generations. So very curious about your experiences with that.
Yes, please.
So I think there can definitely be opportunities, but also challenges, because the online sphere and the new media sphere is also not an equal sphere. And unfortunately, especially over the last year, I think one of the most common conversations among minority ethnic female MPs in our parliament has been around the huge amount of racist and sexist abuse that's now created online, often augmented with AI imagery. So I would definitely say that there is more opportunity to engage and to spread the message and to reach people in a much more informal way, in a much less hierarchical way. But the online public square also has its own internal hierarchies, and unfortunately, many of them benefit those who are willing to hide in anonymity and to use abuse as a way of silencing predominantly women. So I think it was really important that earlier last month, the UK government had this, took the fight to X and said, if you're going to carry on creating or giving people the ability to generate these deep fake images denuding women and girls and children on this platform, then we're not going to let that continue in our country. And there has been some climb down, there has been resistance. So I completely agree with von der Leyen yesterday when she talks about the need for digital sovereignty.
Hannah?
You knew that this is my topic, right? So you immediately pointed at me. Social media is actually something that we have to rely a lot on in Belarus, because you imagine there the regime controls the media sphere, there is propaganda and there is censorship. Propaganda SP, by the way. But propaganda only works when it monopolizes the conversation, and it's not happening in Belarus exactly because the regime has never been able to control social media. It cannot control the internet. So we use everything what is available for us, and our 40+ independent media outlets in exile, reaching to millions inside the country. And for example, on TikTok, one of the biggest outlets, Zerkalo, has 100 million views per month on just one platform. And Belarus is a country of 9 million, so you can imagine the outreach and you can imagine the popularity here. And very briefly on the nukes, because that's something that I know that you're pointing at the clock.
I wasn't pointing at all.
Very briefly, because I think that's also important, again, to mention this pressure that I mentioned in my initial remarks and how important this is. Russia announced the deployment of its Russian nuclear weapons on the territory of Belarus. We were not able to confirm that with our people's intelligence that is available for us. We were not able to really kind of track the nukes in Belarus, but I think Russia is using the territory of our country to threaten the West, and I think the EU should be looking at this really, really closely and impose, again, more pressure, more sanctions, and more punitive measures on the regime. And we are, on our side, connecting this to social media, are working with people's mentality and their views on the nukes, and they just don't want it to be present on the territory of our country.
Perfect, thank you. We'll do one last, very brief question. Yeah, please. And all my bosses are now in the room, so don't make me look bad by,
On that note, I'm Melanie Wards. I'm a Member of Parliament in the UK. I'm a member of the Women Parliamentarians programme, and I was actually going to say, before you said that, thank you to you and Benedict very much and all your staff for the amazing Women Parliamentarians programme. It is really fantastic. One of the things I wanted to voice that I've heard a lot on the side events in this conference, which hasn't really come together as one, is the extent to which the battle to control women is part of the battle of the future of power in the world. And I think we see that in a whole range of ways, from what is happening in Iran to the fact that the Trump administration is funding numerous MAGA-friendly charities, but also those that seek to deny women our reproductive rights in this part of the world and elsewhere. And then we see in Sudan, we heard yesterday, the extent to which sexual violence against women and women's bodies are being used as part of that war. And it feels to me that that is a huge issue that is coming up. And I wonder what the panel might want to say about how you think we best fight back against that.
Thank you. Can we do this very quickly, each one who wants to? Shall we begin with you?
Sure. I mean, massive question. We had a great discussion last night. My heritage is Iranian, so the issue of the massacre in Iran is near and dear to my heart. In the U.S., there's a huge attempt, by far-right groups, kind of connected to Christian nationalism, to really encourage, women to have more children and return to this traditional life, et cetera. But honestly, I don't think most women are buying it, because in one breath, they want you to have more children. In another breath, there's no childcare to help you not work and have a child. And so the policies are just so hypocritical in that sense. It relies on all of us to, there's attacks on voting rights right now as well. There's a bill in Congress where they want to make you bring an ID that matches your birth certificate in order to vote, which means that many married women who've changed their last names will be impacted, so trying to suppress women from voting. I think we have to fight back in every form that we have, in Congress, in the courts, on the streets, and make sure that people understand, the roots of these issues. And, we're far from gender parity in Congress, but we're getting closer. There's more and more women running for office. And to the point of young people having a seat at the table, I always just encourage young people and women, you need to run for office. At the end of the day, being at the table, at the decision-making table, is the most impactful way to affect the policy. So.
Yeah, I think we also need to be very honest about the fact that those who are organizing are very well organized, are very well funded. And I've said this actually in platforms where we've been together, Melanie, where the reality is they've been working on this for more than 20 years. And they're actually starting to see the fruition of their work. And in some ways, we are behind. Now, that doesn't serve as a deterrent. In fact, it means we must redouble our efforts. And the reality also is that if we don't do it in our lifetimes as young women, we will have less rights. And if we have children or we plan to have children, your daughters or those who identify as women will have less rights than you when you were born. And that is a crazy notion to think about in 2026. And so I think the big story here is that it is happening. It's now become out in the open. We really do need to organize. And I think the thing for me that I must say is there's a real power in organizing. When I was a student leader, we were able to literally shake the core of an unjust education system. And we did that because we were well organized and we had a common goal. And I don't just mean this in one country. This is an international struggle and an international fight. And it requires us to not only go back to the drawing table, but understand that we have different lived experiences, yes, but we do have these common, I don't want to say enemies, but that is what it is. And it's from foreign policy to domestic policy as well. And understanding that even in the African continent, even in South Africa, we're seeing a lot of those Christian nationalist evangelical organizations funding very problematic ideas. So now you're even starting to see in South Africa, where we have termination of pregnancy enshrined in the constitution, et cetera, all of those things are now being challenged. So all of us are being attacked, and I think the big story here, a power, or the real power, is in organizing and mobilizing each other. Thank you.
Thank you. Johan?
So absolutely, women need a seat at the table, but once you've gotten to the table, you need to start rearranging that table to make more women fit at the table. And that means diagnosing, confronting, and rectifying structural sexism, structural misogyny in all of our institutions, including inside our parliaments. And I know that you're very committed to that, Melanie, and I think everyone here, including male allies, can be part of that as well.
PS patriarchy. Great question. Belarus, again, is a positive example here. In 2020, we had mass protests, and one of the leaders of these protests is actually a woman. There was a female trio of 3 women who were bravely fighting against the regime, and they were able to galvanize, to mobilize the society. So we are fighting back.
Perfect. Yeah,
There's no time.
Listen, let me briefly end with 4 quick thank yous. Thank you to this great panel. In our report, which I hope you've all read, if not, do read it on the way home, we talk about wrecking ball politics. We talk about demolition men. And we say that the one thing that we need is bold builders. Here you have 4 bold builders. Give them another round of applause. The second thank you is to you for spending time with us this weekend. We hope we made it worth your time. The third, and I think almost most important thank you is to the team from me. Wolfgang and I get most of the credit all the time, and we don't deserve it. They deserve it. They have curated this conference, they have put these events together, they have made sure this program has run seamlessly. And yes, sometimes the halls were a little full, and some of you had to wait a minute here and there, but at the end of the day, I thought it was a brilliantly run conference, and it's the team standing up there, standing over there, standing back there. That's it. And lastly, so before I hand over to Wolfgang to conclude this conference, can I just say thank you to you, Wolfgang. You've been a brilliant boss in the run-up to this conference. We loved working with you. We could come with absolutely every idea imaginable, whether it be let's have an elephant as the logo of this conference, or let's take over a huge bank building and turn it into Ukraine House. Whatever we came up with, you said, let's go. So can I ask the panelists to move down and you up? Thank you, Wolfgang.
Be sure what you wish for, Benedict. Dear friends, I think I shouldn't say ladies and gentlemen again, because I think we've become friends, a community here over this long weekend. We've come to the end of the line now. When we started a few days ago, I saw that we had 250 or whatever side events and a huge program with so many different smaller and larger gatherings. It seemed almost insurmountable. Actually, it all happened, and you were part of it, and I want to just add my own thanks to all of you for having been active speakers, participants, challenging some of the speakers, which is good, which is part of our DNA. At the beginning of the conference, I referred to our Munich Security Report, which says, as you all know, is that our international system is under destruction. Not everybody was happy with that, and I have to say that I was really very interested in seeing how many different views have been voiced over the last several days about this. Some actually have argued that not only has the international system been under attack, but that it's actually already gone, that it's over. Chancellor Merz himself said, actually, your under destruction diagnosis is not strong enough. Others, like Secretary Rubio, spoke about the need of, and I quote, renewal and restoration. So that shows you, the spectrum of views about where we are in either repairing, restoring, or actually accepting the fact that we probably may have to rebuild something practically from scratch. Alongside voices of reassurance, we also heard profound expressions of doubt. Doubts about whether we, in what we used to call the West, whether we still share the same values, whether we still play by the same rules, whether we are, in fact, still on the same team. Our friends from Denmark and Greenland in particular reminded us that if you cross certain lines, that will simply not be ignored and needs to be taken into account. We also saw, and I think that is, as far as I can see, good, we also saw a much greater spirit of European resolve to hold these lines, to defend what we believe are essentially European values. Europeans are stepping up on defense, no doubt about it. My own country does. We are collectively willing to care a larger share, not only of the defense burden, but of our collective responsibility to try to preserve peace, prevent conflict, etc. What we need now, I think, is more than just another series of speeches. I think what we need now is a plan, is action, is an answer to what exactly are we Europeans prepared to do, and if so, by when and how. How do we bring, is a question for my European friends, EU friends, how do we bring the mutual assistance clause, which is in the European Union Treaty, to life? What exactly is our plan to ramp up defense production and to create a more cohesive and globally competitive European defense market? Question mark. This brings me to Ukraine. Clearly, as we were convening here in Munich, our Ukrainian neighbors were continuing to suffer from relentless Russian attacks. I think we were right in selecting as the awardees of this year's Kleist Award the brave people of Ukraine. And we had, for those of you who were not able to be there last night, we had a really appropriate and serious and worthy celebration of this award ceremony with President Zelensky. And I want to express once again my admiration for Prime Minister Tusk of Poland, who came specifically for the purpose of delivering his laudatory remarks all the way from Poland just for a few hours to participate in this event last night. There is more, I think, we can do as transatlantic partners to put pressure on Russia, which I think we've come to agree is sorely needed. Providing Ukraine with the weapon they need, including certainly a lot more air defense, coordinate tougher sanctions on Russia, US sanctions, but there is also, the possibility of more and more comprehensive European sanctions, no doubt about it. And also tackling the shadow fleet. There are still a number of options that we have not fully adopted to increase the cost for Russia's continuing war. Yes, as Secretary Rubio said, our destinies are intertwined. That's good if we accept that. And I want to add that the question of how this war is going to end is actually an existential question for Europe. It will determine, in more ways than one, the future of this continent. And I very much hope that this is not only understood by all of us here in Europe, but also by our American friends in Washington. And I hope very much that we as allies and partners are united and determined to act together to make sure Ukraine can and will prevail. So that's just a small part of our agenda. But I think that when I think about the priorities, it is probably the single most important one because it's so urgent. There are other, maybe more long-term issues that are not less important, but maybe slightly less directly urgent. So let me come to an end. I know you're all waiting for lunch at the end of this dreadful conference here. So finally, let me come to the nicer part, namely to add my own words of thanks. I want to thank the federal government that has always supported us, the government of the Free State of Bavaria that has always supported us, and the German military, the Bundeswehr. They have always supported us. They've supported us with young soldiers who have actively participated in terms of volunteer help. We could never, never, ever put all of this together if we didn't have all these literally who help us do this, organize such a cost. Our host, the Hotel Bayerischer Hof, and the other hotels in the neighborhood, our host broadcaster, the Bayerischer Rundfunk, they're up there with their cameras, our partners, corporate sponsors, and supporters of our foundation. And finally, just before I end, I would like to recognize 2 or 3 of my fellow members of the foundation board. I want to recognize Nikolaus von Bomhard, where is he? Somewhere over there. Nikolaus has been a member of the Foundation Council for many years. He will succeed me as the president of the Foundation Council beginning tomorrow. So good luck to you, Nikolaus. Let me also recognize my longtime friend and fellow German diplomat, Helga Schmidt. Is Helga here? Well, if she's not here right now, I just saw her 10 minutes ago. Helga has done a terrific job in chairing our Middle East consultation group. And I mention her specifically because she has agreed to continue to serve as the vice president of the Foundation Council with Nikolaus. Thank you very much, Helga. And the one before last is my good friend Jens Stoltenberg, who sits right in front of me here, who has recently joined the Foundation Council and who will serve as the next chair of the Munich Security Conference when he believes that he can actually do that. So, so congratulations, Jens, you have a bright future in front of you. Until that time, until he's ready, yours truly, I will continue to serve as the chairman of the Munich Security Conference, so bear with me. And now let me just finish this by asking Benedict to come up here once again. Please come up here, Benedict, because I do want to make sure that it's not only you who thank the team. I want to thank you, and through you, the team which has done now for 16 years. I mean, new people have been added on, but you've been one of the founding team, literally 15, 16 years ago. So thank you so much, Benedict. Thanks to the team. Let's give them a round of applause. If you enjoyed this weekend, put it in your calendar. Next year, we hope to see all of you again. Have a great trip home. Thank you.